Today, I'm excited to say it's my honor to introduce today's plenary speaker, Dr. Bruce Tromberg, the director of the National Institute of Biomedical Imaging and Bioengineering at the National Institutes of Health. Dr. Tromberg oversees a portfolio of research programs focused on developing, translating, and commercializing engineering, physical science, and computational technologies in biology and medicine. His own group at the NIH develops portable, bedside, non-contact, and wearable technologies for quantitative sensing and imaging of tissue composition and metabolism. In 2022, Dr. Tromberg was elected to the National Academy of Medicine. Among his many awards are the R&D 100 Award, the Michael S. Field Biophotonics Award from the Optical Society of America, the Britton Chance Biomedical Optics Award from the International Society of Optical Engineering, and the Horace Furumoto Innovator Award from the American Society for Laser Medicine and Surgery. Dr. Tromberg is a fellow of the Optical Society of America, the International Society for Optics and Photonics, the American Institute for Medical and Biological Engineers, and the National Academy of Innovators. Today, Dr. Tromberg will share with us some of his thoughts on artificial intelligence, followed by discussion with our expert panelists, Dr. Robert Lookstein, Executive Vice Chair and Professor of Diagnostic, Molecular, and Interventional Radiology, Mount Sinai Hospital, and SIR Secretary. And our panel also includes Dr. Julius Shapiro, Associate Professor of Radiology, Hepatology, and Biomedical Engineering, and the Director of Interventional Oncology at Yale University, Dr. Danya Day, Assistant Professor of Radiology at Mass General, Harvard Medical School, and Dr. Judy Gachoya, Assistant Professor of Radiology at Emory University School of Medicine. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Bruce Tromberg and our esteemed panelists to the stage.
Thank you so much, Eric, and thank you for the invitation. Thanks to the organizers for the invitation to come. I'd like to talk about how we at NIBIB, and I noticed that it was difficult to actually name NIBIB, the National Institute for Biomedical Imaging and Bioengineering. It's a long, complicated name. We're the Engineering Institute at the NIH, the only one that focuses on engineering exclusively. And I'd like to talk about how we help, and we as a community can accelerate partnerships between engineering and medicine. And this is particularly important for interventional radiology. It's particularly important for the introduction of new AI tools to use trustworthy tools, effective, where we know predictable outcomes will take place. So when Eric asked me to give this talk, I really reached out to colleagues across the NIH. In particular, I'm highlighting Chris Kandarpa and Brad Wood, who are interventional radiologists, help bring me up to speed on the many things that are going on. But in between their two pictures, I'm very grateful to our program directors within NIBIB, all of whom are physical scientists and engineers who have in their portfolios quite a significant number of image-guided interventional technologies. So I'll summarize some of those today, things that we're supporting, talk about major efforts, I think, on a larger conceptual stage. But one of the things that I've learned from preparing for this and speaking with Eric and my colleagues is that interventional radiology is one of the most demanding use cases that really requires this beautiful integration of engineering and medicine. So I'm really excited to be here and learn more about that and try to help understand some of the barriers to moving technologies from more boutique-y lab-like settings to more generalized and widely used in practice. So let me give you a little background about NIBIB. We haven't always had an engineering institute at the NIH. It's really just a little over 20 years old. There's been very significant growth in this collaborative effort of engineering and medicine all around the country, all around the world, but it really started in 2000 with a public law that was passed. President Clinton signed a particular House resolution that called for the integration of computation and imaging and physical science and engineering technologies into the NIH in a very distinct home. And I think many of you, if you think about NIH at the time, you might think basic biology research. Zebrafish comes to mind in my thoughts. But to be able to do non-hypothesis-based or research that's just focused on technology development without a driving biomedical hypothesis, those opportunities didn't exist. And our community really, really benefited enormously from that. So you can see in the middle plot, since NIBIB was really established and funded in the early 2000s, 2002 is when we sort of opened for business. There's been this incredible nonlinear inflection point of growth where there's been expansion of biomedical engineering departments in schools of engineering and schools of medicine all around the country. So we now have almost 180 accredited undergraduate programs. There are more than 200 graduate programs all around the country. And this community is particularly engaged in the development and the movement of those technologies and advancing them to the benefit of patients. But the big cultural shift that's happened is schools of medicine have really decided more recently in the past few years that engineering and technology development, innovation, and entrepreneurship are key elements of medical education. So we've seen the University of Illinois, Urbana-Champaign, start an entirely new med school with engineering in their curricula. Just after that, Texas A&M, led by my predecessor, the founding director of NIBIB, Dr. Rod Pettigrew, established an engineering, the NMed program at Texas A&M. That actually gives dual degrees, both in medicine and engineering. So there are many examples of this, and these are beginning to repeat themselves and grow all around the country. We've also seen in engineering, schools of engineering have not had human health as a top strategic priority if you go back 2 decades. But virtually every school of engineering now has in their top 1, 2, or 3 human health as a major goal, and there are clear initiatives that are being led by schools of engineering in collaboration with medicine. All of this is changing the nature of these schools and the programs and the tools that we all are developing and use, and they're centers of innovation and entrepreneurship all around the country. So if we look at NIBIB and how we fit into the rest of the NIH, we're actually very much like practicing engineers. If any of you physicians are collaborating with engineers, you know that engineers are typically developing enabling technologies, and they're hoping to apply that through partnerships. Partnerships is a really key and foundational element of the NIBIB. It's the core of our game plan. We take these engineering and imaging technologies and work with virtually every institute and center. There are 27 institutes and centers across the NIH. What's really amazing is that if you look at the growth of bioengineering investment over the years, it's growing twice as fast as the rate of the NIH budget. And if you take a snapshot from 2023, 14% of the NIH budget was invested in biomedical or bioengineering technologies. That's an enormous amount in that year, about $7 billion. Our new director, Dr. Monica Bertinoli, a longtime surgeon at Harvard Medical School, oncologic surgeon, had her start as an undergraduate chemical engineer at Princeton. So there is this growth in training in the multilingual capabilities that really benefits all of us in medicine, but I think in particular, there's enormous benefit for the IR community. So what is it that bioengineering does? We have some very similar issues with IR, bioengineering. There's no disease focus. We don't need a biological hypothesis. We're agnostic with respect to those things, which we're very proud of, that we cover such a wide scope and scale of important problems. The kinds of things that we support span across many, many domains, from engineered biology, which you can think of as spanning from synthetic biology, that is the ability to reprogram single cells to make molecules that are of specific interest, or model them computationally, just like you would model an integrated circuit where the fundamental switching elements are transcription factors instead of transistors. So that's a very, very active area. The development of new biomaterials, The building and the fabrication of microphysiologic systems that emulate human physiology and can serve as surrogates to assess how one might respond to disease or become bionic components that are inserted into humans for replacement parts. We support sensors and point-of-care devices, so biophotonic, bioelectronic, bioacoustic types of sensors, point-of-care devices that are really transforming how we're delivering healthcare to individuals outside of tertiary care settings. We support, of course, medical imaging approaches from the biggest physics, like whole-body PET scanning with 50,000 detectors and 500,000 scintillators that can do a scan in 7 minutes and update the dynamic contrast every second. These are really spectacular big physics instruments, as well as very small physics, from ultrasound, pocket ultrasound. We even supported the very first pocket and small portable ultrasound technology development. And then, of course, therapeutic systems. So we have a very significant group of image-guided therapeutic approaches that couple strongly into the imaging systems, but I'll talk about some of the investments there. Some of them that are really quite spectacular, including external energy beam delivery into regions of the body, really obviating the need to do surgery for inactivation or removal of tissues. And those can be targeted to molecules or nanoparticles in order to have even more selective, molecularly selective or spatially selective inactivation or destruction of disease. And finally, all of this is really tied together by data science, modeling, and computation. This is really the foundation of what we all do in engineering and physical science as we're moving it in all these different directions. So artificial intelligence is a natural thing. When I first arrived at NIH in 2019, I thought, has NIH just discovered math? Because everyone was talking about AI and all of these machine learning techniques, but of course, the engineering community has been doing machine learning. Some of the first FDA-authorized algorithms were in the early 90s, and this is a really critical part of all the technologies that we develop, both to model and develop the technologies optimally, so in a sense, a digital twin for what we're trying to create, and then for what we're all familiar with in the imaging world, as we get data from any piece of hardware, any hard materials engineering device, we compare it to a model in order to extract new information content from something that's invisible or unseen in that system that we're trying to measure or characterize. So I'm going to focus today on this left side of that iconography that really describes what NIBIB does. It's the intersection between therapeutic systems, imaging devices, and data science modeling and computation. And this has very unique relevance in terms of how IR and AI really come together. So first of all, imaging technology requires computation, modeling, and data science for the image formation. You can't make an image without computation. You have a source, you have a detector, you have an object in between, and we need to mathematically represent that information. So that is a standard approach. AI is a statistical method that we use. It goes beyond old style standard approaches, but it's very normal. It's very well integrated into the culture of what we do in bioengineering. We understand in that rendering of the image the source characteristics, the detector characteristics, they have noise characteristics, and then the object that we're measuring, the human, has dynamic attributes. We can understand those, and we can integrate those into our AI and machine learning models so that we can do better in terms of performance. Those features, the source, the detector, and the human, who is the target of the imaging, are ultimately the limiting factors. And we need to improve how we can see beneath the surface dynamically by using these kinds of statistical techniques. One of the big advantages to the imaging community as opposed to other aspects of healthcare, which is just a Tower of Babel cacophony of language, is that there is the DICOM imaging standard. And that allows ingestion of large data sets that are acquired under a variety of different conditions and even in different places to train and develop AI and ML models. Also, we are naturally dependent upon hybrid mechanistic models, some physics models that come from how energy is transported through materials like biological tissues. Those can be foundational. They don't explain all the interactions, so we can enhance those with statistical techniques and then naturally use both supervised and unsupervised approaches to optimize the information content. And if we have these hybrid mechanistic models, this is extremely important. Much of AI and ML are thought to be or is moving towards, and we're all concerned about, a black box in results that are not explainable. So by having these mechanistic models, we have explainability and interpretability to the kind of information that we extract. And fundamentally, the imaging question, what is ground truth, which we all wonder about even before there was an explosion of AI, because we're rendering an image through computation, that's always been persistent in the minds of our community, now is really intensified and amplified as we develop these artificial intelligence, machine learning, deep learning tools. So let me talk a little bit about the investment that the NIH has made in imaging, IR, and AI, and really summarize some of the growth. Just over the past 5 years, there's been enormous, over $10 billion, almost $11 billion in total investment from the NIH in imaging. The growth over 5 years is about 35%. For reference, the NIH budget has increased about 20% over that time. The combination of artificial intelligence and machine learning is just the artificial intelligence and machine learning investments alone are now $4.6 billion. We didn't even keep track of those investments before 2019. So this is growing at an enormous rate, threefold, more than threefold over that time period. And then the combination of AI with imaging is growing at the fastest rate, nearly fourfold over this 5-year period. So you can see there's enormous opportunity for investment and growth in these areas. What about in interventional radiology? So our whole team worked very hard to try to characterize interventional radiology. It's not got its own special, unique code like we have with imaging and artificial intelligence, but by bringing together and aggregating multiple codes, we're able to get some insights. First of all, the investments in IR in total over those 5 years are actually much, much less than in the wide imaging field, about 10% of that total imaging field investment. But the interesting thing is that the growth of those investments has been really pretty slow. You can see less than a 5% increase over that 5 years. This is roughly accounting for small increases, inflationary increases. So it's pretty static. But the combination of artificial intelligence and IR, although small, less than $100 million total invested in this area across the NIH, it's actually growing at quite a fast rate, so a 2.4-fold increase. So for those of you who are advancing these kinds of research and technology areas, I hope this is hopeful or positive kind of data where you can see these are opportunities where all across the NIH, multiple institutes are spending resources. How actually is that distributed across all the institutes? So this is a plot of the percent funding towards AI and imaging, and the combination of the two just over the past 5 years. So what you can see is the bubble size are the number of awarded applications in this combination area of AI and imaging. And what was quite shocking to me, and on the y-axis, you see the percent of the institute's budget that's allocated towards this. So you can see National Cancer Institute, which is enormous, 6, 7, 8, I lost track of how many billion per year. And the NIBIB, which is, I like to measure it in billions, so it's about 0.45 billion per year. We're very small, but quite active in this area, investing enormously in this intersection between the two. And as you might expect, cancer and then a variety of non-specific diseases are really the targets of these. We also see this interesting pattern that goes with AI and interventional radiology, where National Cancer Institute, the largest institute, they have the most amount of money, but about the same number of investments in that intersection of AI and interventional radiology as one of the smaller institutes, NIBIB. So I think these are hopeful statistics for suggesting that this is a problem that engineers are tuned into, and there are opportunities for enhancing and deepening those kinds of collaborations. We do have data on interventional radiology going back more than just 5 years. When you take the AI out of the search element, we can see how these topical areas are growing. And what you can see is that NIBIB is the third largest funder behind the National Cancer Institute and NHLBI of interventional radiology. And that makes sense given the types of major focus application areas in cancer and heart disease that are leading the pack. But there's strong investment in fundamental technologies. IR is a very complex and technology-intensive area, and it's in some ways the ideal use case for building those medicine engineering partnerships. So when you bring AI into IR, there are many opportunities for optimization. And I think many of you are familiar with these: workflows, efficiencies, report generation, automation of protocols and imaging, treatment and dosimetry, device selection, which kinds of approaches do we use, quantifying localization and prediction of disease, navigation, registration, and fusion, addressing response and outcome, biopsy-informed treatment strategies. So you perform lots of biopsies. You would like to have very specific information on how to treat the patient immediately, if not sooner. The major challenges, of course, are how do we match the problem with the best model and the best learning approach? AI requires, depending upon the type of approach, whether it's machine learning or deep learning with neural nets, the data often are too small coming from one site. We're data hungry. We need these large data sets for training. It's also difficult to label data. Oftentimes, particularly in supervised learning, we need ground truths. So this is absolutely critical in the application. Annotations are difficult, and they can be quite expensive. There are many other limitations, including the diversity of models. How do we generalize what we find to other sites and platforms that are even the same technology but made by different manufacturers? There are maybe many variations in anatomy and practice skills by the practitioner, the IR practitioner. And as these different types of data go into our learning algorithms, they can increase the dispersion, so to speak, of the algorithm's performance. And then ultimately, standardization. I mean, this is a huge challenge. It enters into every aspect of this. But something is happening, obviously. So this is a plot of all of the AI ML-enabled devices that are cleared by FDA. So it's an enormous amount of growth. There are now 692 algorithms that have been authorized by FDA. We see the year-over-year estimated growth from last year to, or from 2022 to 2023. All the tabulation is not in yet, but more than a 30% growth just between that year. The overwhelming number are in radiology, approaching 80% in radiology. This is the leading specialty. We don't have the codes to distinguish between IR and radiology, but if you look at roughly the scaling between the communities, we would expect that there would be some significant fraction within radiology. It's the highest number of submissions and the fastest growth rate. As of just this past year, no device has been authorized with generative AI or artificial general intelligence. This is expected to be actually many, many years in the future. They're not powered by large language models, so these are really the kinds of engineered-oriented AI approaches that enhance information content from our imaging and optimize our procedures and workflow. The models that are authorized here from FDA, they range in complexity from very shallow machine learning to multi-layer deep learning. And as I mentioned before, hybrid methods are really common. They combine different algorithmic approaches and using a model to generate some features and then another model to do classification and segmentation. Overall, and if you look across various sources, there's enormous excitement in the commercial sector about the opportunities for AI to drive global market growth. So this is one representative piece of data. I think I looked across multiple sources of data, and many of the predictions are about the same. What's going to happen with AI in healthcare over the next 5 years? And what we expect to see is roughly a 7-fold growth, about a 48%, somewhere between a 40 and 50% compound annual growth rate per year. And it really kind of raises the question, where is radiology and interventional radiology going to be in that enormous growth that we're expecting to see? So NIBIB supports two kind of broad areas in AI and imaging and IR, and I'm going to talk about these, give you some examples. The first are in the formation of data repositories for algorithm development, optimization, and validation. Right now, this is primarily for diagnostic radiology, but I think there are some very, very unique opportunities to take this model and apply it to IR. And the second are AI algorithms and devices, advanced device technology, the integration of new ways to see things and optimize performance that can be used in pre and intra and post-procedure steps. So let me talk first about these data repositories. So our flagship data repository, and I think really one of the best examples of a data repository in the country, in the world, is Medical Imaging and Data Resource Center. So MIDRC itself is a partnership. We formed it in August of 2020. If you recall back in those days, there would be emergency departments that were sort of overrun by patients coming in with an issue with possibly COVID. What is the differential? Chest x-rays and CTs were taken, and it was impossible really to have enough radiologists to interpret the information content and then work backwards and do proper treatment and prognosis for patients and optimize their outcomes. So assessing acute COVID was a very important target of opportunity and a use case that we could bring the imaging community to get together around. And I had new resources that came from Congress for us to be able to invest in new technologies specifically for COVID. So we invested in the formation of this network. Mary Ellen Geiger at the University of Chicago is the PI. There are 24 core institutions. It's a partnership with 3 professional societies, ACR, RSNA, and AAPM. They're foundational members who make very tangible and active contributions to the overall network. We have multiple universities around the country who are engaged beyond just those original 24, but it serves as an open discovery data commons, which involves a repository, as well as advancing machine intelligence capabilities, and is being shifted as the COVID pandemic has diminished. We now have long COVID and beyond, plus other diseases that we can apply this to. So since the inception, there have been more than 300,000 images that have been ingested into this database. 165,000, more than 165,000 have been released to the public, more than almost 14 terabytes of images. There are hundreds of users all around the world. It's built a community of engaged people. It's one thing to have a database, but you absolutely need to have a community to access this information. There have been a number of publications and presentations that have emerged. There are about 30 AI and machine learning algorithms that are being developed. And what's important is that the data are split into public-facing data, which is housed in the Gen 3 public data commons, and sequestered data, which is not public, but plays a very critical role in the real-world testing of performance. the support of translation, and ultimately, FDA is extremely interested in this for the regulatory support that's needed to validate algorithms that are being developed. Probably one of the most important contributions of MIDRC is identifying what the many, many sources of bias are that are involved in the formation of algorithms and, in fact, even collecting the data and doing the annotations and so forth. So there are dozens of sources of bias, and there is a bias awareness tool and bias estimators that I recommend accessing. This is relevant to any database and AI algorithm development problem, whether it's at your home institution that's being developed by a small group of investigators or a national database. It involves multiple sources on the collection side and the data preparation side, model development, model evaluation, and model deployment. So I encourage you to take a look at all of these bias sources. And in fact, these are so important that with the President's executive order to build a national AI research resource, which is going to be about a 6-year, $2.6 billion program that will have very, very unique facilities and resources that are supported by multiple agencies across the government, MIDRC has been selected as a key pilot program to inform this national AI research resource and provide these tools in particular to the bias estimator tools and all of the things that have been developed through the MIDRC resource. It's also been selected by ARPA-H, which is a new agency, the Advanced Research Projects Agency for Health, that's housed at the NIH. They've constructed a biomedical data fabric that's designed to try to advance and accelerate artificial intelligence approaches in a variety of different areas, not just in imaging, but in all aspects of healthcare, and help seed and contribute to that 7-fold growth that we're expecting to see. But MIDRC has been funded by ARPA-H as one of 5 initial phase performers. It extends MIDRC from COVID into cancer very specifically, and all those tools are an essential component of the ARPA-H toolbox. So the second major area are on algorithms and advanced device technologies, and I'm going to kind of zip through these. I have many examples. They're very beautiful examples that many of us are working on in the engineering and physical science community. You may be aware of some of these. One of the big challenges that we have is how do you get these out of the labs that we support, for example, at NIBIB or at the National Science Foundation or even the Department of Defense? How do we get them out of those labs and into the hands of practicing interventional radiologists? So one very active area is improving the information content of ultrasound. And many years ago, I used to sort of joking, colleagues and I used to jokingly refer to ultrasound as ultra noise. You know, where do we get the information content? How do you interpret that? And that's actually a challenge that's proliferated as everyone now has pocket ultrasounds. So they can be quite powerful, but they can also be quite dangerous in not being able to give you accurate information content. One of the major areas of focus, and this is from a group at the Mayo Clinic, is in using high-speed Doppler ultrasound techniques in order to render vasculature at high resolution and classify tumors based on the many vascular features that can be extracted. This is really a low-cost addition to Doppler ultrasound. The algorithms accurately can evaluate this microvasculature and characterize kidney, liver, thyroid, and breast tumors. It's being used probably most extensively in thyroid right now, but moving quickly in these other areas. Another ultrasound diagnostic that provides unique and informative contrast is in looking at mechanical properties. So from this group at the University of Rochester, Doran Mix and colleagues, this is a pretty spectacular way to look at ultrasound in regional strain accumulation between diastole and systole. It's key to acquire high frame rate at this time during these events. And it uses a computational model, so a hybrid physics propagation model to extract mechanical properties. It's a finite element mesh that's overlaid with this cross-sectional view of the abdominal aortic wall to track frame-to-frame displacements. So the model actually considers tissue stiffness and stress on the wall. It accounts for strain in both the axial and circumferential directions, and you can see in this example, you have two aneurysms or two regions that are showing strain. One appears to be quite stable, and the other is unstable with strain variations distributed throughout. They're the same diameter, so if you simply were tracking the diameter of this over time and trying to make a treatment decision based on that, it may be too late. There might be a rupture. If you analyze this strain distribution, you might be able to intervene, plan surgery or percutaneous stent graft right at the moment of discovery. There are some techniques that are being developed to enhance the information content from deep inside tissue. One is photoacoustic computed tomography. So this very briefly involves the utilization of light waves to generate sound, and the sound is listened to by acoustic transducers. So the coupling between the two, the information content comes from, if you tune the laser to molecules that are absorbing inside blood, hemoglobin, you generate images of vascular structures. And there's lots of work in advancing computational techniques with AI. This is from a group at the University of Illinois, headed by Mark Anastasio, to be able to visualize those vascular structures, measure saturation in each one of the arterial and venous branches, and reconstruct and render that and visualize that in 3D and find inhomogeneities that are malignant transformations. In terms of, again, with ultrasound hybridized with another technique, there's magnetic resonance elastography for liver characterization. This is moving to be quite a mature technology developed by Dick Amen and colleagues at the Mayo Clinic. What's really interesting about this, it uses an external ultrasound modulator to wiggle the tissue, and the MR is then orthogonally positioned to look at displacements. So this allows mapping quantitatively of stiffness, and you can see this map of stiffness in kilopascals. You can look at early changes in liver, for example, fibrosis. You can measure tumor stiffness that aids in surgical and IR planning. It's being now extrapolated to other organs, brain, breast, and heart, so it's moving very quickly. And you can derive other biomarkers from these fundamental pieces of information content that you get from these dual modalities, like the storage modulus or the loss modulus, the volumetric strain, the shear strain. So this is important information. How these biomarkers translate into outcomes for patients, we don't know. And this is where the community has to really engage and form collaborative studies. You're all familiar with digital subtraction angiography. This can potentially be sped up by generating high frame rate DSA from low frame rate instruments using AI. This approach involves two learning models, independent component analysis, and that's unsupervised. It decomposes phases of flow, so the time-dependent flow characteristics, and convolutional neural nets, which allow us to do the spatial separation of arterial, capillary, and venous flow. That's all happening with deep learning. So you can see a full rendering of that in the upper right-hand corner of the slide, and then a frame-by-frame flow visualization in the lower. One of the most important applications of this, and I'm showing this for the brain because it's being used for arteriovenous malformations. IR, of course, involves AV interventions or has interventions for AVs throughout the body, and this general technique, I think, can be applied quite nicely to other organ sites. A common approach is using ultrasound transducers to guide peripheral revascularization. These forward-viewing transducers sometimes encounter obstructions that it's really difficult because of the noise characteristics of the ultrasound source and the detector. It's really, really hard to visualize lumen spaces where you can continue to move the device along the guide wire. So AI techniques, and these are being developed at Georgia Tech, can be used to really optimize that path. So you can see the true lumens, which in very small lumen diameters, less than a millimeter, are essentially invisible to the basic ultrasound. But as you use AI and machine learning, you can visualize the actual lumen path, and that's provided to the interventional radiologist. Other techniques that are really quite mature now are optical coherence tomography and doing intravascular imaging, in particular in coronary arteries, but also in peripheral. One of the really overlooked contrast elements coming from OCT is the loss of polarization. So light that's polarized goes into the tissue, and then it is depolarized by microstructure. So this is an additional optical coherence tomography contrast. It's compatible with virtually all intravascular OCT catheters. It's been developed by Brett Buma and colleagues. So you can see high-resolution maps of intima, media. You can see the plaque and the identification of shadow components. This gives AI techniques, give automated and accurate segmentation, both in lumen and all of these microstructures. I'll skip over this one, but ultrasound and OCT are in combination. This is another example of work coming from Georgia Tech that uses VR for catheterization planning in AFib. So here it's critical to guide the catheter to the target and maintain contact so you can really confirm that there's full treatment. And AI plus robotics can be used to identify the regions of the catheterization of the ablation that are needed, and then follow in real time, following these fiducial markers of the ablation locations, the ablation process. So this is a combination of virtual reality for pre-treatment planning and then intraoperative characterization of treatment and treatment effects. I'm going to accelerate through, just a couple more. I think many of you are involved in the many techniques for optimizing prostate therapy. Transcutaneous pelvic MRI guidance is really a critical area. There's a group at the Brigham that's really advanced many of these technologies using open source frameworks, the 3D-UNet open source framework it's a convolutional neural net for image segmentation. And one of the key features to this is the multi-structure segmentation and labeling. And then with the robotic insertion of the needles, it really adapts the needle insertion, constantly updates and repositions with respect to all of these segmented regions of tissue. So it accounts for both their mechanical properties, which can potentially deform or alter the needle trajectory, and also keeps the needles out of those structures that need to be preserved. And the last example that I'll give is one on characterization. Of course, IR, really one of the key elements to IR is in doing biopsies. Imagine if you could do a biopsy and then have full imaging capabilities of that biopsy specimen immediately where you pulled it out. So there's a group at the University of Illinois, Urbana-Champaign, that centers on label-free imaging. You can see in the upper right some representative images of unprocessed, totally fresh biopsy specimens illustrating cellular structure, extracellular matrix, collagen, elastin, lipid structures, protein structures. This is all driven by high-speed 3D laser tomographic techniques that take advantage of ultra-fast lasers and nonlinear interactions of light with those materials. This information can be generated in minutes, giving full 3D information content, and they're very actively engaged in developing AI models for segmentation and classification of diseased tissue. So the answer can come on the table within minutes as opposed to the traditional workflows, which can take days to weeks. So, and finally, we support a Center for Virtual Imaging Trials, and there's a lot of excitement over full computational modelings of patients and digital twinning of individuals. This is going to be extremely important for education. And what's coming also is, via large language models, the ability to train on radiology images and reports. And what you see here of these thoracic images are just entirely voice-generated models of pathology and of normal tissue. So this is coming, with generative AI having the largest demands because they need to ingest large amounts of data. But the advantage is it can be totally unstructured data. There are huge computational requirements here, and it can generate solutions to new problems and queries as they appear. In fact, even generating new code at your request. So I think a lot of us in the engineering community use this to generate Python code for new problems as they're encountered. We support 3 major centers that have technology in these areas. The National Center for Advanced Technologies and Image-Guided Therapies at the Brigham, Claire Tempany leads this. The Center for Biomedical OCT Research at MGH, that's led by Brett Buma. And the Center for Interventional Biophotonics Technologies, led by Laura Marcoux and Griff Harsh at UC Davis. So I encourage you to get in touch with these engineering-based centers that are developing fundamental technologies that I think are really quite valuable and can be integrated into many of the things that you do. So just to summarize, we see that there's been significant research growth in the combination of AI and ML with our imaging approaches. Lots of tools and technologies and FDA algorithms. Radiology has been leading this, but the question is, well, is it going to continue to lead, and how is that going to impact IR? Major IR challenges that we've talked about throughout this talk. I think the solutions, and I guess it's maybe my generic solution to all of these kinds of problems, medicine and engineering partnerships. So technology-driven IR is really, in so many ways, the ultimate use case for our community. We'd like to see, or I think I'd like to encourage, perhaps, the development of MIDRC-like data repositories. Those are ways to bring communities together, to converge around special use cases, and really hammer through some of the challenges that confront all of us in this field. So with that, thank you very much, and we'll move on to the panel.
Bruce, I want to thank you so much. I think in the efforts of time, unfortunately, the session, there's sessions that are starting in about 5 minutes. I think we're going to have to call this session out. I personally think, obviously for my own politics, that lecture was absolutely spectacular and fascinating. I would encourage all of the members to really think, now that we're in the era of artificial intelligence, how to incorporate it into your practice. This is clearly being integrated at a very, very high holistic level. It's in our operating systems, it's in our EMR, it's in our PACS. Bruce gave tremendous examples of how research is really going to drive this to be further integrated into our practice moving forward. And as he so wisely said, this is the time now for IR to step up, embrace this, embrace the future, and allow us to be empowered to drive better care for our patients. So Bruce, thank you so much.